So in that 6 years, what I discovered is that two distinct traditions have emerged in philanthropy from very early on. And one of them pretty much dominated charitable giving for 1,000 years. And then there was a dramatic shift, and the other one gained the ascendancy. And what the book, Philanthropy from Aristotle to Zuckerberg, argues is that philanthropy would be better today if it found ways to restore the balance between these two approaches, instead of either or, both and. So the word philanthropy, as everyone knows, derives from the Greek, at the time of ancient Greece, about the 4th century BC, when Socrates educated the youth of Athens, which he did without charge. He called it, he was acting out of philanthropia, friendship for humankind. And from the outset, philanthropy was a dangerous business, because Socrates' philanthropy, teaching the youth of Athens, didn't go down very well with the elders of Athens, who accused him of corrupting the youth of the city and sentenced him to death. And he had to drink a cup of poison to kill himself, as we see here. In the heyday of Athenian democracy, a system known as liturgia was used to persuade members of the elite, the wealthy elite, to choose a public cause to finance, something small, funding a play, sending a team of athletes to the Olympic Games, or something big, building a temple or even a warship. And the prominent citizens sought to outdo one another in the extravagance of their gifts to show the superiority of their own civic virtue. So from the outset, philanthropy was about power, prestige, and it was lavished at the personal preference of the donor. So power dynamics have always been at play in philanthropy. In the same historical era, the Jews created an entirely different kind of philanthropy. At the start of the Hebrew Bible, they tell the story of Adam and Eve, every man and every woman. And importantly, these are made in the image of God. And this was a revolutionary doctrine at the time, because this was an era in which only kings and emperors and pharaohs were gods. Moreover, the Jewish God had a special love for the poor, and therefore, so should everybody who believed in him. And this instituted a different kind of philanthropy, in which those who gave and those who received were bound together in a relationship with one another, with God, and with the community. And interestingly, in Hebrew, the word for charity, tzedakah, also means justice. The Jewish sage Maimonides later codified this giving into a ladder with eight stages of ascending merit. And the highest of these is helping others towards self-sufficiency. So for the Greeks, philanthropia is about cementing society, but it's top-down and essentially a voluntary activity among the elite. By contrast, for the Jews, tzedakah is about community, and it's two-way, not top-down, and it was a religious obligation which fell on everybody, not just on the rich. In the 2,000 years which followed, these two approaches, the top-down and the two-way, have run like threads through the history of philanthropy. And in the book, I call them, as they persist today, strategic and reciprocal philanthropy. When Christianity first came into the picture, it tried to merge the two approaches. Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan, in 386 AD, wrote the first great work of Christian philanthropy. And it set out to synthesize the Roman Stoic tradition and the Greek vision of then the Jewish vision of charity. But later, Christianity lent much more towards the Jewish tradition in a philanthropy of mutual respect. And that dominated Christianity and European giving for 1,000 years, from the 4th century to the 14th. The rich had a duty to give, and the poor had a duty to pray for the salvation of the souls of the rich. So there was a two-way process. So an early example of user agency, if not user voice exactly. This same tradition of respect was visible after the 18th century Enlightenment. Then philanthropy, the first man in Britain to be called a philanthropist was not someone who gave a lot of money away. It was John Howard, the penal reformer. And this was an era of philanthropy as activism. William Wilberforce, the anti-slavery campaigner, was another. And they didn't give away sums of money. They gave away their time. They dedicated their lives to their causes. And interestingly, it seems to me today's celebrity activists like Bob Geldof, Bono, and Angelina Jolie are very much in this tradition of 18th century philanthropy. So this two-way philanthropy of mutual respect, continued through the different centuries, surfaced again in the 19th century, particularly with the Quaker chocolate makers, Joseph Rowntree and George Cadbury. And they, interestingly, changed their business methods to fit their philanthropy, in contrast to many of today's philanthrocapitalists who do the opposite. But these are outliers. The tradition that came to dominate philanthropy after the Middle Ages and dominates till today, I argue, is the one which began with the Greeks and the Romans. And it was a top-down approach, and it was often about philanthropy as a mechanism for social control. This was when the state first got involved in regulating charity with the Elizabethan Poor Law. We see here a beggar being tied to a cart and whipped through the streets. The same approach is there in through to the Victorian Poor Laws. And it was there in the moralizing charity of the 19th century. But it reached its high point in the philanthropy of Andrew Carnegie, who thought that the rich were innately superior to the poor. Carnegie built 3,000 libraries, parks, art galleries, museums, concert halls around the world, and he called them ladders on which the aspiring can rise. If you give money directly to the poor, they'll just waste it on drink, he declared. And when he refused to give decent wages to his workers, he said, quote, "Maybe this is sometimes hard for the individual, but it is best for the race because it ensures the survival of the fittest in every department." So Carnegie, as you can see, was not big on user voice, and the concept of social justice was entirely absent from his philanthropic agenda. Yet it was Carnegie who set the template for 20th century philanthropy. He wanted philanthropy to be more businesslike. He created the idea of the philanthropic foundation. And today's big givers like Bill Gates follow in Carnegie's footsteps largely. And Gates has a tendency towards the same data-driven command and control approach. And this has been, in areas, a huge success. Polio once paralyzed 1,000 children every day. Now it has been cut by 99.9% worldwide, thanks to the 2.5 billion vaccinations funded by Bill Gates and others. Gates, he has seen giving a polio vaccine to a kid in India, where polio has now been declared eradicated. But this top-down approach highlights another part of the philanthropy power dynamic. Who chooses how the money's spent? There is rightly universal admiration for Bill Gates over polio, and he's currently being much more sure-footed on COVID than are many governments. But he can be wrong. Earlier in his philanthropy, he spent $2 billion on thousands of high schools serving nearly 1 million poor and ethnic minority students. And a few years into the project, he suddenly concluded that his approach was misconceived and the funding ended abruptly. So to the philanthropist, it's a failed experiment and a few lost billions. But to the children, it's years of lost education. And this raises the question, to whom are philanthropists accountable? Now, to be fair to Bill Gates, he's learned from his mistakes. He sees mid-course corrections as an inevitable part of good business practice. He's written, "As we learn which bets pay off, we have to adjust our strategies." And here the influence of his wife, Melinda, is key. She's very people-orientated, where he's enthralled with technical fixes. Melinda says, delivery is every bit as important as the science. We can only go into communities if they want us to be there, and we have to listen carefully to what they want and what their needs are. And she gives us an example, a plan of bills to combat HIV/AIDS in India, asking sex workers to get their clients to use condoms. The women told Melinda there was no chance of that unless something was done to address the fact that many of their clients were violent to them. And the violence perpetrated on sex workers had to be addressed before the issue of condoms could be. So philanthropists are having to learn, as Bill did there, the shortcomings of the Carnegie top-down philanthropists know best approach. Better philanthropy involves donors listening to recipients and entering into relationships of mutual respect and partnerships. For over a decade, the Novo Foundation, run by Jennifer and Peter Buffett, pictured here with Peter's dad, Warren, who funds the whole thing. The Novo Foundation was for a decade a model of this approach. It gave $700 million dollars to pioneering projects to empower black women and to combat domestic violence. To quote Jennifer, that doesn't mean we're not interested in sound structures, in evaluation and solid results, but solutions should always have a human being, a human voice at the center. But constant vigilance is required to ensure this. The more recent developments at the Novo Foundation have shown this, because its profits come from Warren Buffett's, its funds come from Warren Buffett's company profits, and these slumped hugely in the COVID-19 stock market crash earlier this year. And at that point, Novo reverted to a top-down model of philanthropy, and it made cuts which its partners condemned as the opposite of what the opposite of what the crisis requires. So in conclusion, what philanthropy needs today is to bring together the precision of strategic philanthropy and the empathy of reciprocal philanthropy. And to do that requires a radical openness, a new kind of listening, a new humility by philanthropists. And that may be uncomfortable at first, but it's the only way in which, in my view, modern philanthropy can recover its lost soul. Thanks very much.